Hello. This is what you see every day at school, isn't it? There's nothing strange or unusual about it, but is there? In most schools, if you look carefully, you'll find clues to the past that you just passed by without really noticing. Like a date stone telling you when a school was built, or even rebuilt. A window shape, a clue from when church people built many schools. And here's a tall city building with iron railings round the top, a clue that it was once a school with its playground on the roof. Even a playground crowded like this one tells you something. Today, all children have to go to school. 150 years ago, very few children would have been able to go to school. So, of all these children, only these few would have gone to school 150 years ago. Why? Well, most children had to work as soon as they were big enough. Some children started work as young as 5 or 6. They often worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in factories, in the fields, in coal mines. Some children never saw daylight. Their only free day was Sunday, when work stopped. So church people, worried because so many children weren't learning to read the Bible or to write, built schools for them which opened on Sundays. This Sunday school is in Hanley in Stoke-on-Trent. Look how big it is. That tells us lots of children came here, although they'd worked hard all week. See, it even says it had to be enlarged. That means made bigger.
Jesus went out and sat beside the lake.
It's still used as a Sunday school today. There's a group studying the Bible. In the early days, none of these dividing walls were here. This was just one big, long room, crowded with over 1,000 children and adults learning to read the Bible and to write. This is what it might have looked like. I wonder if you would have been as keen to come to school all day on Sundays, your only day off, as these children were. Many would have walked a long way to get there. Notice how clean and neat the children are, because they'd also go to services at the nearby chapel. The churches built day schools as well for children who didn't have to go to work. The Church of England set up a national society to do this. In the mining village of Silverdale in Staffordshire, the National Society and the government helped local church people to build a school which is beside the church. Let's go across and see what clues we can find about its past. If you look carefully at the school building, on this wall you can see a stone plaque with the word girls. Boys is on another wall. This one says infants. These plaques are clues that once there were 3 schools, and this old plan of the school shows them all joined together. You can still see this from the rooftops today. On the left was the infants' school. This was the girls' school, and this was the boys' school. And the high roof sticking up at the end was that of the schoolmaster's house. It's been made into a classroom, but the old plan shows that it was once the master's house. He lived right next to the boys' school. Today this is one school and boys and girls are taught together. But what is the same is that there is a bell which is rung to call them in. It's a small school, so why do they need a big bell? And why is it so high up above the school? Well, few people in the past had clocks, so the sound of the bell told the children that it was time for school. And it's high up so that the sound can be heard across the village. This was the girls' schoolroom. It's just one big long room. There are no classrooms or art rooms or libraries. Well, it's not all that big when I think about it, and yet we know from old records that well over 100 girls were taught in this room. Here it is filled with over 100 children to show you how crowded it must have been, especially when they were all standing for assembly. This is how it might have looked. It looks much the same as today, doesn't it? So how did they all sit down? They all squashed together like this on benches. We know this from drawings on the old school plans. The benches were very narrow. They rose one above the other and were called galleries. Most schools had them, as you can see in this old photograph. But however much they tried to crowd the children into the schools, the churches just didn't have enough money to build all the schools that were needed. This was especially so when new laws stopped very young children from being sent to work, and they now could go to school. So the government allowed local councils to raise public money to build schools. These new schools were called board schools because they were built by the school boards or committees. In the pottery town of Hanley is one of the first schools built by the Hanley School Board. The school board must have been very proud of this building because it put on its name, the name of the school, the date in which the school was built, and there's even the head of a schoolboy and a schoolgirl, one on either side. This school, like the one in Silverdale, was really 3 schools in one. But here there are 3 separate buildings. Today it's called Clarence First and Middle School. Let's go inside and see what clues we can find. I'm in the boys' school. This school was built later than the one in Silverdale, and it has separate classrooms, 3 on either side of this big hall. Look how high the hall ceiling is. It's certainly a big room. But don't think that because there were separate classrooms that the head teacher couldn't see what was going on. Look at that window up there. That's where the head's room was, and from there he could see into each classroom. This was to make sure that the teachers as well as the pupils were hard at work. Look what a clear view there was of the classrooms on both sides of the hall. There are some interesting clues in the classrooms. Look, for example, at these tiles here, not at the pattern, but at the way they run. You'd expect them, wouldn't you, to go along straight, but instead they go up in steps like this. So that here they're almost 2 meters high. Now, what do you think that tells us? Well, you remember the gallery at Silverdale? These tiles go up in steps, just like that gallery. And they tell us that there was a gallery in this room and where the gallery ran. These old photographs show you what it looked like when parents of children here today were at school. They were taken during an end-of-term party, and now they're historical clues too. And here's another clue, this old fireplace. They've got a fireplace in every classroom in this school, although as you can see they don't use them now because they have central heating. Can you imagine in the old days the teacher standing here near the fire warming himself, and how cold the children at the back of the gallery must have been? And there's another clue up there in the ceiling. Can you see that hole there? With an open fireplace and the smoke coming from it and all the children crowded together in the classroom, it must have got very stuffy. And that hole, it's called a ventilator, was used to take the stale air away. There's another ventilator on the wall here. The handle's shaped like a hand holding the stick, and this is what they use to open or close the ventilator. On the table here I've got some of the things that children used in schools 100 years ago that I've collected, and if you keep your eyes open you can often see these things in bazaars or jumble sales. Things like this, for example. You probably know that this is a slate. This was found behind a blackboard in an old school. But I wonder if you know what this is. It's a pencil holder, a slate pencil holder. And look, here's the slate pencil. Of course, in those days, paper was very expensive, and slates had the advantage that you could write on them. Here we are. And then use them again and again. One old lady told me that in her school the boys used to spit on the slates like this and then rub them with their elbow to clean them, but the girls, who were obviously a little bit cleaner, used to carry a wet sponge in their father's old tobacco tin, and they'd clean their slates like this. Here's an old picture of 2 girls with their slates, and look, they are neat and clean, aren't they? Of course, children did use pen and ink as well as slates, and that's why this was used. When I first saw it, I thought it was for holding eggs, but it isn't. It's for holding inkwells. Every morning a pupil would pour ink into the inkwells. It's a tricky job because ink is messy, so the monitor, that's what the pupils who helped their teacher were called, the monitor had to be very careful. An inkwell was then put in each desk, just as Patsy is doing now. That's what the holes are for at the top of old desks. This is the sort of pen they had to write with. Look how sharp the nib is. Children learn to write by copying words, as this boy is doing. They had to copy the letters exactly the same so that they all wrote in the same way. It's not as easy as it looks. This is an old copybook. The writing they had to copy in the book is printed in spaced out lines down the page. Look, this pupil hasn't copied the F exactly, and you can see the teachers corrected it at the side. And it was so easy to get into trouble by making a blot like this. Who knows, perhaps in the future some historian might be looking at your school books for clues about the past. There are some more clues in the head teacher's room. Perhaps you didn't know that head teachers have to write down everything important that happens in school in their logbooks. They're called logbooks because in the old days to log something down meant to write it down and keep it as a record. This is one of the first logbooks. It even has a lock to keep it safe. And they tell us what happened in the school about 100 years ago. In those days they had a big problem to try and get the children to come to school regularly. And this logbook here gives us one of the reasons why that was so. This is for December the 14th, that's in winter, remember. The attendance is poor, the poverty is most pitiable. Several children are absent altogether from want of boots, that means they haven't got any boots, and many in the school have very little on their feet. These school children have boots, they were the lucky ones. Especially in poor areas, everything was done to encourage pupils to attend school every day. Here's a special photograph that's been taken to show how well these children have done. Never absent is chalked on this slate, so we know that these children never missed a day at school. Sometimes books were given as prizes for good attendance, like this one, or a medal, or even a picture. These attendance prizes are often kept by families, so you may find one of these clues at home. This is the last clue I've found in this school. I've shown you how boys and girls were taught separately. Well, they even had to play separately. This line down here shows us where there was once a wall that stretched right across the playground, separating the boys from the girls. So the boys played on one side and the girls played on the other. Well, I've shown you some of the clues that I've found about schools in the past. See how many clues you can find in your area. And ask your parents and grandparents what they remember. You might be surprised.
When I was your age, before the war, the Second World War, when the Flying Scot went through the station at Madeley, just a few miles up the road, they used to take all the children from the school onto the station to watch it go through. And that was a terrific thrill for us because we didn't have so much entertainment as you did.
See if your grandparents, for example, will admit to doing their PE like this.